Y2K is an American film directed by Kyle Mooney and starring Jaeden Martell, Rachel Zegler, Julian Dennison, and oddly enough, Alicia Silverstone. This was actually Kyle Mooney's directorial debut after almost like 20 years of acting and writing and doing tons of other stuff. So he was a pretty good candidate as a director here, I'd say. Proved himself, you know. It was cool that A24, gave him this opportunity, but to be fair, the dude did have a pretty cool little concept for a film. Which, don't get me wrong, has its share of flaws, but I had fun with it, and I actually appreciated it a lot in ways. So the plot follows a group of high school students all going to a party on New Year's Eve. But this isn't any just regular New Year. It's 2000, and anyone old enough to remember that will remember that, the entire world was like anticipating a potential technological disaster. It didn't happen, luckily, but this film focuses on, what if shit did go wrong? But it doesn't go for any kind of like realism. This is a comedy after all. I suppose a horror comedy, but there isn't like a ton of horror. Most of the horror stuff happens kind of right as midnight hits the beginning of the second act, and I did really appreciate that scene. It was a lot of fun. Very, very cool. It's got a nice chunk of cool, bloody kills, and yeah, I loved it. But I digress. Let's go back to the beginning here. The first act was basically Superbad, if you remember that movie, and I was all for it, man. I really have a soft spot for that era of, like the buddy / stoner comedies, and I kind of miss them, at least I think I do. The buddy team here are Eli and Danny, played by Jaeden Martell and Julian Dennison, and I could really identify with these guys, I think I was a similar kid when I was their age. They aren't, the popular kids by any means, and they aren't really part of any sort of, like, social group. And speaking of such groups, you see all sorts, because it was 1999, right? You see the new metal kids. You see the swing revival kids. Remember that shit? Anyways, hip-hop kids, the Abercrombie kids, and I thought that was a very, very cool detail. So, yeah, I mean, this whole movie plays on late 90s nostalgia. Not as bad as, the Deadpool Wolverine movie, but it's close. You get, technology of that era, like AOL, America Online. You get music like Cisco with his thong song. If you're my age, I think you should have a lot of fun here. I've talked about Eli and Danny, but there are other characters, worth mentioning, like Laura, played by Rachel Zegler. She's the popular girl that Eli has been interested in for a while, but, fears that she's out of his league. I also have to mention my personal favorite character, Garrett, played by director Kyle Mooney. He works at a video rental store and smokes weed all day, living the real life. And I thought it was really funny. I thought he was really funny. But what I really appreciated about his character is that he brings that 90s and early 2000s like stoner comedy vibes. And I think it's a clever touch. Solid writing. So, I mean, if you haven't seen the trailer, you're sitting there wondering what happens when midnight hits. And I think I'm going to leave that alone. No spoilers today, but I will say that I quite enjoyed the first two acts. But the third act is where things didn't really work as well for me. The characters and dialogue, kept me engaged enough, but the whole plot to solve the crisis humanity was starting to face fell a bit flat for me. It seemed too easy, not that interesting, and kind of lacked any kind of real tension. And really, most of the movie lacks tension, but I was fine with that, up until this point. The third act also introduces a character that I also won't spoil, but let's just say he was a singer for a very popular band at the time. I'm giving Y2K a 6 out of 10. It's a fun watch. I recommend it to anyone that has nostalgia for the late 90s. I'd also recommend it to fans of, stuff like Gremlins, Short Circuit, Superbad, like I mentioned earlier, and stuff like that. It's not scary, really. I don't think it's ever scary, but it does have some decent gore at times, some pretty cool practical effects. Definitely worth a watch. So grab your puka shells and your corn CDs and crack a surge and just have a good time, man. Cheers, guys.